Hello and welcome to Frank's School. It's the 14th day of the 6th year, first video. Back to the Land is a book. I just read it by Dona Brown. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute, but I wanted to correct a couple things. I spoke about a carillon, bells. I had the 45 minutes, the 3/4 hour wrong. 15 is dun 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 dun. 30 minutes is, I think it's dun 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 dun. But then the 45 minutes is just dun 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 dun, slightly different from the 15 minutes, and so you didn't actually have to do the whole thing. And then, so this is a minor correction. Another thing I thought about saying is my schedule, my daily schedule is so strange. I mean, I go to bed at 7 o'clock, sometimes earlier, sometimes 6 in the evening. 8 o'clock would be very late for me. But then I get up, I get up at about 3 by choice, sometimes earlier. At the moment, rarely later. And I realize one of the side effects of that, one of the good things, maybe one of the reasons I do it, is I can spend, 4 hours in my home without any advertising. There's no television, I do this or that, it's quiet. In a sense, it is getting that real world back. So anyway, I just thought that, my schedule is a most unusual one for somebody who doesn't have to be at some factory job at 5 in the morning or 4. But it's by choice, and it serves too, because I can see to the fire. Well, anyway, back to the Land. Here's the book. I actually read a book. I don't do that very much anymore. By Dona Brown, and and it was great. I recommend it. Later on, I'm going to do a better review of this because I think I'm going to read the book a second time. I'm a very slow reader. This is one of the reasons I probably had such a unpleasant time at Harvard, surrounded by skim readers and fast readers and stuff. And I was a very slow reader. It takes me a long time. And after slowly reading through this book, now I'm going to go back and even more slowly probably read through it a second time. In which case I'll have more to say about it. I learned a lot. Now, it is not a book that tells you how to go back to the land. How do you do it? No. I mean, it is extremely scholarly. As a matter of fact, the amazing scholarship of this book, of a 300-page book, that's including the index, there's 40 pages of footnotes. That's the extent to which this woman viewed the literature about Back to the Land, and she traces it basically chronologically. I would have spoken about this book sooner, but I loaned it to my neighbor. I wanted him to read it. Now he would describe himself as being at the very tail end of the baby boomers. He thinks of himself still as a baby boomer, but at the very tail end. Now, as opposed to me, who am a baby boomer, I mean, I would be called that, but I'm from almost the beginning of it. So there's about a 20-year difference between us. I told him, I actually asked him as part of his work for me if he would read the last few pages of this book. It's a book that I think I told him you might want to read this book backwards, and I might when I read it again I might read it backwards. I don't know because as it's coming up through time, from about the 1940s on, I start to know some things already. Before that, I didn't know very much. And I used to teach slightly about this in school. When I was teaching public school, though, I didn't do any preaching. I avoided that. I was teaching the humanities, the history of human expression in light of history and what happened. And so I do touch on the Back to the Land movement. And I said that it appeared in the 30s and to some extent in the 40s, and then again big time in the 60s. And then kind of died out. That's the little bit that I told about it, which was most of what I knew. I just mentioned it because I think it was important that I should, but it was not major. Anyway, I wanted him to read the end of it. And we talked about it a little bit, not a lot because we work. But anyway, his parents and their friends, he related to it in quite a different way. Uh, they would be my age. We're, as I said, I think already we're about 20 years apart. And in the around 1970, he witnessed his parents and their friends doing things that he thought were ridiculous in many ways, crazy. And he's a very smart man. He was so smart. This will shock you maybe, but he was so smart even back then that he knew enough to drop out of high school. You know, you might think, is that smart? Yeah. In his situation, in his case, it was, and I think often it is. Anyway, extremely smart. And what he was saying about this, oh, by the way, this was done at the University of Wisconsin Press. It's part of a series. Kind of amazes me that this book even exists. I'm interrupting, I know. And Dona Brown, I'll let her know I'm doing this review. And maybe someday I'll communicate with her and maybe even meet her sometime. She lives in Vermont, lived for a while in western Massachusetts, an area I know quite well. And so anyway, back to my neighbor. He said, you know, what he could relate to it so well, the part that he looked at. He said, yes, there was that whole thing of, well, you just go out and do it. And he watched his parents and their friends go out and do things. I don't think they actually ever went back to the land. I can't remember if he said that, but he remembers that impulse. But the thing is, they didn't have the skills to do it. It's not that easy. You don't just go out and read a little bit in a book and then go do it. It's not that easy. The skills were gone. Before World War II, he was saying people really did have a lot of skills. I mean, how to butcher a hog, you know, on the farm and stuff, and they didn't have the skills. And I said, or I don't know, maybe he said, now I'm different, you, Frank, because you actually can do things. I said, well, yeah, I know just what you're talking about. I read that stuff too. He says, yeah, but you can do things. And I said, well, I was a carpenter for 2 years, and that's where I learned to do things. It's more complicated than that. But anyway, very interesting to hear, and he hadn't changed. I'll come to that in a second. Now, in terms of the book itself, I recommend it. I mean, I was delighted because you know what it did? It put me in context. You know, so many people who have known me wonder, where in the heck do you come from? Where do you come up with these weird ideas or whatever? Or the easiest thing to do was peg me as a hippie. I was never a hippie. But anyway, that's sort of the easiest way to do it, to kind of write that silly time off because of the silly things they did. I mean, people, it seems to me, younger people have no idea of the resolve and the moral engagement that young people had in the 1960s. Something that seems to be missing. And has been since on the part of young. Well, anyway, what was I saying? In the book, I learned so much. I mean, there was so much stuff pre-1940s that I had no idea. I had no idea it was such a big movement. The whole crafts movement of the 20s, I'm a product of it in a strange way because my first wife was the daughter of the founder of the American Crafts Council, and that whole thing was coming out of the crafts movement. It's part of it all. One of the things, though, that I found was left out was fiction. I was waiting for some of this stuff. For example, Swiss Family Robinson, an enormously influential and popular book, and then in the hands of Disney, a movie which, you know, stirred people with a kind of a dream. Not mentioned. I don't think it was mentioned at all. She just doesn't touch on fiction. Or the movie in the 1930s, Our Daily Bread. I thought surely that will be there. But again, no. I mean, her scholarship was going along a different line. My own movie that I probably will, until I die, try to get somebody or me come up with this movie Resurrection, one of the reasons I'm trying so hard there is because it's not a matter of scholarship now that's needed, but a dream, change the paradigm, something to believe in. These were dreams, and I speak about that elsewhere. And another thing too, I wrote here, villagist, in a sense, back to the land. You know, that you could say, well, that pegs me. Frank went back to the land. Well, I went back to the family farm. Physically, I went back to the family farm, which was bought in the 1940s. You know, I've lived here for over 40 years. I don't know exactly how much. Never didn't own it. It all kind of complicated. Within the last 6 years or so, my wife and I finally own the center of it. So my personal experience is not really what, given that it's the family farm, it wasn't just go out and buy some land and get some land and get back to the farm. She does mention that song from Woodstock, got to get back to the land to set my soul free or something. It wasn't the same as that. But anyway, I find that myself, I'm a little bit more of a villagist now, instead of the idea of some all by myself or just a family on a farm growing their own food. I'm more of a villagist, I guess. But anyway, what my neighbor and I, him at the very end of the baby boomers, me at the beginning, what we still share. and it's like you could say I got frozen in time about 1975. And in a way he did too, as a young man about that time. You know, messy, life gets messy. But he came out of it. I said, but what do you do? You know, your parents did these silly things and it was ridiculous, but what did you decide to do? And he decided to do the best he could, morally, was to live as much unlike the modern American lifestyle as possible. As much unlike that. And I am the same, in a way, with my attack on brand names in the global economy. That way, even though you might not be creating some wonderful world or little paradise or something like that, you would not continue to do so much damage as that lifestyle does. I mean, he was talking about like his parents, people driving in a Winnebago, or, well, back then, but driving in a SUV a few miles to recycle a bag of aluminum cans. You know, well, anyway, he and I have that completely in common, which is interesting. Now, I could so easily offend my peers, and I suppose I just might as well, because I think they sold out. The people of my age, or you, sold out. If you're actually listening to me, you knew better. You knew better than if your morals were going to be there, than to continue to live the kind of lives that Americans lived. I mean, sure, you want to raise your family and you want to offer them a good life and all that kind of stuff. But you should have known better. It was clear by 1970. It was clear what was happening to the environment. It was clear that the modern American or Western lifestyle could not endure and was extremely destructive. But I just watched the movement dissolve around me about 1975. It was gone. And off they went, my peers, off you went. You might as well give it up. I mean, they talked about yuppies. Hippies became yuppies or something. I never quite understood that. I just saw them disappear. And then their children were raised the same way. So what does it take? One of the things that seems to be, well, she's more subtle than that. She points out the various causes of the back to the land impulse, but so often it's because of some kind of great discontent. And we don't have that great discontent yet. But, and I suppose that's maybe what it's going to take, not just a moral fervor. All right, well, bye for now.